Americans are currently experiencing unprecedented inflation levels, and experts like Steve Hanke believe that the worst is yet to happen as fears of a recession continue to linger around. In a recent interview with Kitco News, Steve Hanke recently gave his thoughts on the current state of inflation. Stick around until the end of this video to gain crucial knowledge on inflation and how it might affect your investments.
The first thing I'd notice that I did that work with John Greenwood, as you know, and we published that in the Wall Street Journal on July 20th, 2021, about a year ago. So we made the forecast about a year ago. We were the only ones who ever actually put a number on anything. Let's face it, we did hit the bullseye. No one's perfect. We said it might get up to 9%. It's 9.1. That's pretty close. Now, the interesting thing about that is that since we were the first and only ones to ever accurately predict what has actually happened, I think only one major publication, Fortune magazine, has run a couple of articles on this, but no other major publication has picked up on it at all. Now, of course, you've picked up on it with Kitco. That's it. So it's a fascinating story.
Well, you published it on the Wall Street Journal.
How in the world you can get a very accurate forecast of the greatest inflation we've had in 41 years, and no one reports on it. And Greenwood and I have written a whole series of articles in the Wall Street Journal on this. So it's not a deep, dark secret of some obscure publication by some academics and whatnot. It's in the big journal. Everyone knows about it, and no one reports about it. No one asks a simple question. Well, how did you do it? Do you have a crystal ball or do you have a model? No, we have a model, a quantity theory of money, MV equals PY. That's how we get there. It's a model that's been around since the 16th century, and it worked like a charm. Now, the question you ask is this the peak? And I would say, yes, probably pretty close to the peak or the peak. We said 9%, it's 9.1. So that would suggest that a year ago, we thought 9 was going to be about the peak. Where are we going from here? We're going to be using, again, the same model John Greenwood and I used. John and I have done more work on this. It looks like we're going to be 6 to 7% for the rest of this year and the rest of next year going into 2024, 6 to 7%. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of excess money that still hasn't come out into the economy. It's been produced. Remember, since February of 2020, we've had a 41% increase in the money supply measured by M2. Yeah. And of that, you've only had about 12.5, 13% eaten up. So the rest is coming out. Around 28% will eventually come out into the economy as what? As inflation. And that's where we end up with our 6 to 7%. So there you have it, David. That's where we're going. The markets, by the way, are not pricing this in at all. I think the markets are way, way off. If you look what the markets are pricing in, they're pricing in about 3.2% inflation on average for the next 2 years. So it's going to be about double that. Adjusted for inflation, incomes have gone up, so living standards have gone up. When you think about it, there are all kinds of things we didn't even have in 1955. I mean, in 1955, we just bought our first television. That was a big deal where I came from. Out in the country, you know, that no one had a TV. We got about the first one in the area. All the neighbors were coming over there to watch the thing because they'd never seen a TV before.
Well, yes, technological innovations have made things like TVs cheaper over the years, but you know, I'm just talking about basic living standards, basic cost of living, rent, food, clothing, healthcare. Could the average American afford the same amount that today as they did back in the 70s, let's say?
Yes. Even as bad as things happen to look today, if you really reflect on things seriously, things are getting better, not worse.
Okay.
From a living standard point of view.
People are concerned that their wages won't be able to catch up with inflation now. I mean, you're projecting 6 to 7% inflation next year. Do you think wages can continue to grow at the pace of inflation or beat inflation for the next couple of years?
The first thing we talked about is kind of the broad picture of living standards over a long time, and definitely they're unambiguously getting better. The short-term thing now you're talking about is what's happening to the wage versus inflation battle right now. And the wages have not been keeping up with inflation. People didn't anticipate the inflation that we have. Almost no one predicted it except John Greenwood and myself. So as a result, they didn't demand higher wages to accommodate that increased inflation that's actually occurred. They will step up to the plate in the next rounds of wage negotiations and demand higher wages to try to keep up. That's the way it always works. They're not going to stay in the hole, forever watching their inflation-adjusted wages and income go down over time. They're going to demand adjustments upwards.
We've got a looming recession. If you believe that the Atlanta Fed GDP Now tracker is accurate, they're predicting a contraction in Q2. That would make 2 consecutive quarters of GDP growth, which would mean we're in a recession now. If we're in a recession, Professor Hanke, not governments, but companies will be squeezed in their margins. They're not going to be able to afford to pay people as much as maybe they used to, or maybe they'll still increase your wages by a little bit, but not at the pace of growth that we were accustomed to in the past 2 years. So my question is, you've got inflation on one side pushing up wages, you've got a potential recession weighing down on wage growth. Which force do you think is going to win out?
Well, first of all, the Atlanta Fed is one thing. The thing I'm going by is Greenwood and Hanke. We think there's a 70% probability we'll be in a recession by the end of the year or early next year, using the quantity theory of money, using MV, money times velocity equals PY, the price level, times Y, the real rate of economic growth or activity. So we will be in a stagflationary situation. And I would not bet on the scenario you gave where companies are going to be squeezed and they're not going to be accommodating wage increases, because right now their balance sheets are pretty strong, companies are in pretty good shape, and I think there'll be some upward adjustment in wages. So the next round of wage increases will be upward. For those who receive the checks, it'll be a windfall that they'll put in their pocket, but it's a gimmick. It doesn't have anything to do with controlling inflation. Inflation is always and everywhere caused by one thing: too much excess money being created by a central bank. So the relief checks it's literally a political populist gimmick. And by the way, people won't change their consumption patterns because they won't view these windfalls as being increases in their permanent income. Whatever people view as their permanent income, where they think it's stabilized and permanently going to be, that's how they gear their economic activity. And if they get a one-time windfall, they'll just put it in their pocket and they won't spend it. For them, it's a windfall, but you got to ask the question, where's the money coming from? It's coming out of somebody else's pocket. Maybe it's coming out of their own pocket. It's like a temporary tax cut. Temporary tax cuts are usually just gimmicks. They don't really affect anything over the long term because they don't affect permanent income that people have.
Supposedly, the state has a $97 billion budget surplus, and so they're taking this. They're taking, like you said, it's basically designed as a tax refund, and it's supposed to be coming out of the state's budget surplus.
point number one, they tax people too much in the first place. That's why they have a big surplus. They should be refunding most of the money. And instead of saying, oh, we're great people, we're giving you some inflation relief money, they should say, we made a huge mistake. We overtaxed you tremendously. The state's running a huge budget surplus and we're giving you a refund.
What did you think of Steve Hanke's analysis? How bad do you think inflation will be in the next few years? Give us your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, kindly like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.